Welcome to the Make It Happen podcast. My name is Melanie Moreno. I am a blogger, a content creator, a health coach, and most importantly, I will be your host. Join me for some fun and inspiring conversations with amazing individuals coming up now. Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the Make It Happen podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I don't want to turn this intro into the longest thing ever, even though I am a big fan of long intros on podcasts myself, but this episode's already pretty long, so I don't want to stretch it out too much. However, I do want to say that this has been a passion project of mine. I've been considering starting a podcast for almost a year now, and it took a while to get it off the ground, but I feel really excited about releasing this, and I really hope that you guys enjoy the conversations or listening to the conversations. And if you ever have any suggestions for how this podcast could improve or some guests that you would like to see, then feel free to send me a message, email me, tweet me, all that good stuff. So, okay, I'm gonna stop gushing. I'm very excited. You can tell I'm excited. Let me just start talking about today's guest. Today, I'm joined by the sensational Leah Boston. Leah is a content creator, a traveler, a yoga teacher, but perhaps she's best known for her food photography and plant-based recipe creations on Instagram. That's actually how I first got to know Leah, through her beautiful and delicious creations that she posts on her Instagram feed at Fit Girl Treats. In this episode, we talk about what it was like for her growing up in a small town in Pennsylvania and then making the move to New York. She shares what the atmosphere was like there and how that compares to her current home of Brisbane, Australia. She describes how her interests have evolved over time and what passion means to her, the discoveries that she's made through experiences that she's had, and the influences that she's had in her life. There's also some really beautiful advice that Leah provides on mindfulness and presence that I think you guys are really going to love. So without further ado, let's dive right into this episode.
So I really love the weather, and it's funny because people always told me that I should live on the west coast of the States anyway, because I don't know, people here always think that I'm from California, which is really funny, but I do love it here. Weather-wise, it's really amazing, and energy-wise, it's so much healthier, I think, than New York. It's just a much slower pace living, and it's much more like local, and I find it's easier to network with people because people are just friendlier or happier, I guess. So they're easier to like approach. When you're in New York, people are just like, they're so wrapped up in their own lives and constantly rushing from like point A to point B that they don't have time to actually connect with other human beings, I feel like. And it's not anybody. It's not that I always tell people, I'm like, it's not that people in New York are mean or rude. It's just that we have so much pressure to perform all the time. And there's this culture in the East Coast, like this constant rat race, this constant like competition with people, that it's created kind of this atmosphere of rudeness, but it's not that at all. It's just that we're all trying to like keep our heads above water. And here you don't have that. Here it's everybody's a lot chiller.
Yeah, I know. I tend to think of the East Coast of the United States that way too. It seems, from what I've heard, to be very fast-paced, corporate environment, really hustle and go, that type of scene. And the West Coast, on the other hand, is known for being laid back, self-paced, a little bit more of the energy for a freelancer's lifestyle, which is so you. So it's not surprising that people think you're from California.
Yeah, definitely. Like that was the big thing for me. The reason that when I made my move, I made such a large move is because at the time, I knew that I needed a really large energetic shift. And leaving my job, but staying on the East Coast wouldn't have solved that problem for me at the time, because I would have just ended up back in the hustle because of the culture there. And not to say that it's bad. I think that there's a lot of benefits to experiencing that. And I lived in New York for, 10 years, and I did that. And I did it, from what most people would consider from the outside, I did it successfully, but I didn't want to do it anymore. And if I stayed in New York and left my corporate job, I would still have to be like constantly struggling to keep up with the lifestyle and the cost of living, and compete essentially with my peers to like make a living. And it's not about competing because you want to be better than people. It's about competing to survive, essentially. Like, it's so hard to get by in New York. They make it so hard. The cost of living is astronomical. Most people who work in the city can't afford to live in the city. It's a really rough place. And it really challenges you as a person. And I think that's where that saying comes, where it's like, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. And I think it's very true, to be honest. The reason I've been able to set up myself as well as I have here and kind of survive this massive life shift is because I have that experience behind me. And I think that's really helped me here. And I definitely have had comments from people here that are kind of like, wow, like, you're a real go-getter, like, you know what you want. And they're not used to that. They're not used to the confidence or like kind of push to get things done. And so I'm thankful for it. Like, I'm 100% thankful for the 10 years that I was in New York, because I think they've served me, and there was a purpose to me experiencing that part of my life.
Leah Boston, thank you so much for coming on to the Make It Happen podcast. I am beyond excited to be able to speak with you today, so thank you so much for being here.
I'm so excited, and I'm so glad that we finally were able to put it together. I know I'm just like, I think Brisbane brain happens, and Australia brain happens, and like, I'm so bad with scheduling these days. It's terrible.
So you described how most recently you're from New York, but where are you from originally? And can you tell us what your upbringing was like?
Yeah, so I am a full-on East Coast girl, like 100%. I grew up an hour outside of Philadelphia, and I never saw New York City when I was younger, really, other than like a school trip. And I never really even saw Philadelphia that much when I was younger. Like, my mom hates city living. She's really bad with like crowds and stuff like that. So it was not something that we did as a family. And so I think for me, growing up in a super small town, most of my childhood, I lived on like this property. There's 13 acres of like wooded land, quarter-mile off the road. You don't know your neighbors. Like, there's no kids to play with. You're not like in a development or something. The closest thing to you, you have to drive like 15 minutes away from the house. So yeah, I grew up like in a very, like, the complete opposite of what New York City is. And I think I always knew from a very young age, like, I want to get out into the world, essentially. And for me, for the longest time, that meant like New York City, because I didn't know, like, that seemed like the big outside world. And then once I got to New York City, then like I started traveling outside of the country. But being from such a small town, New York seemed like, the top of the list. Like, if you can get to New York, you've made it. So yeah, I always had that kind of like drive to do that.
So, growing up as a young girl in Pennsylvania, how did New York come onto your radar? And how did you end up making that move?
No, it's really funny, actually. So I'm like the black sheep of my family. Most of my family hadn't been to New York until I started living there, and then they came to visit me, and like, they love coming at Christmas time to see like the city lit up and all that stuff. Like, most of my family is from Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland area. We have some family up in Maine, so they're all like from like the suburbs, like country living. Yeah, and like none of my friends either, to be honest. I think what happened was, in high school, I got really into the arts. And I took my senior year of high school, I took like 5 art classes and only like 2 like academic courses, like as little as I could take as far as academics go, which is weird because I was always a decent student. Like, it's not like I was bad in school. I just really loved the arts. And I think that for me, when you get immersed into that, all you hear about is New York. As like, to be a successful artist, you have to go to an art school in New York. Like, everybody talks about it. So when I started applying to colleges, it was like, if I was going to be a successful artist, I had to go to New York. And so I was really adamant about getting into a school in New York. And that's kind of where it started.
What was your college major?
So I actually was convinced, obviously, when you say to somebody you want to be an artist, people look at you and you're like, well, that's not a feasible career move. So I was talked into going into architecture. So when I was originally applying to colleges, I was applying for architecture schools. And I looked at a couple in Boston and I looked at a few in New York. And I ended up going with Pratt Institute, which is an art school, but they have an architecture program, a really decent program. But I think for me, my heart was still wanting to be at art school and not be at like a regular institute, like that does more like academic learning. So I chose to go to the art school, but still do the architecture program. At the end of the day, after spending a year doing it, I absolutely hated it. I was miserable. Changed my major, moved back to Philadelphia, ended up graduating from Moore College of Art for fashion design, which is an all-girls college. I graduated with like 26 girls in my major, tiny, tiny school, but really good because you get a lot of like individual attention from your instructors and you're able to like really build deep connections with these people. And I also think like it's what you make of it. So the school itself isn't necessarily as prestigious as like Pratt Institute, which I was at prior to that, but I was able to make the best of that situation, and that education and that environment suited me very well. And so I was able to take that and apply it after school, which ended up working out for me really well. So yeah, my background is actually a BFA, so a Bachelor in Fine Arts with a major in fashion design.
Wow, that's so cool. Architecture and fashion design might not seem directly related, but I strongly believe that creativity is like a muscle, and once you start using it, it can be applied in so many different places. With that being said, I want to ask about another big creative outlet of yours. How did you get into Instagram and start doing food photography, food styling, and recipe development?
Yeah, so it's totally like people hear my background and they're just like really confused. But what I tell people is if you're a creative, you can apply that to any part of your life. And if you're able to tap into that side of your brain and that part of you, which I think everybody has, it's just learning how to like tap into it, realize it. Fortunately for me, it's something that naturally, like I've naturally been drawn to that part of my brain, and so I've used it more. But for me, the connection between architecture to fashion to food styling, essentially, which I don't really consider myself a food stylist. Like for me, it's much more about the actual recipe and the content than it is about the photograph. But the reason I got from point A to point B is because essentially I'm still working with this 3D medium, right? And so it's all art in the end, and it's all sculpture at the end of the day. So it went from designing 3D buildings to designing clothing, which you work 3D with the body, to designing food, which is like a 3D sculpture, essentially. Like if you make a cake, like it's pretty much just a type of sculpting. In my head, that's how I translate it, I guess. So I've always had a harder time with the photography part of it, but the actual making of the food part of it, I really enjoy. And I love being in the kitchen, and I love playing with recipes. And like, I grew up baking. It was a huge part of family tradition, was like baking and Christmas cookies and Easter candy and like all of this stuff. So I think it came very easily to me that way. And I was also put in a situation where like I had to make it work because I had to change my lifestyle and change my diet due to health issues that I've had. And so it was like I had to make it fun. I had to make it so that I wanted to do it.
Was your Instagram purely for creating recipes and posting your creations? Or was it a form of accountability, as you said, to sort of keep yourself motivated?
Yeah, so I didn't even have Instagram when it first came out. It took me like 2 years to get an Instagram account, and I only did it because like people that I was working with were like, I don't understand why you don't have an Instagram account. You should do it. Like you're a creative. And the account originally started, it was like pictures of my dog and like just normal things. And then I had some severe health issues that I was dealing with. And so when I changed my diet, I started documenting what I was eating more for myself than anything, just a kind of a way to like keep track of recipes and to like keep track of how I was feeling. It was kind of like a journal in some sense. I wouldn't say necessarily accountability, but just more like I don't I don't journal. Like I know a lot of like that's a big thing right now, and I do think there's a lot of benefits to it, but I tend to use my Instagram to journal even till this day. So that's why a lot of my captions are very personal. Um but yeah, I think it became like my kind of like outlet to kind of like just process what I was going through.
How did the name Fit Girl Treats come about?
So that name is pretty new. I think I came up with that name about 2 years ago. That seems like ages ago now, but it's still kind of new. Before that, prior to me going fully plant-based, I've been vegetarian for the majority of my life. But I got into this, before I got my yoga certification, I had already started my health journey at that point, but I got really into like powerlifting and was using like a lot of like protein and stuff like that. So the account before Fit Girl Treats was called Just Add Protein. A lot of my recipes, I was using protein powders and stuff. And prior to that, I can't remember what it was called. I don't think it was my name, but before that, it was like pretty much just a personal account. And then I changed it to Just Add Protein, and I was working with some companies um, that were doing like organic proteins and stuff. And then when I switched to plant-based about, I guess, almost 3 years ago now, I changed the account handle again to Fit Girl Treats. And at the time, Fit Girl Treats wasn't just supposed to stand for Fit Girl Treats as in like fit treats like food, but it was kind of like treat yourself, and like it was like Fit Girl Treats as in like treat yourself, treat your mind, treat your body, etc., which I don't think it translates that well now. And I'm actually, this is huge because I've not like announced it or anything, but I'm actually considering changing the handle soon. So there will be a big shift.
It sounds like your Instagram has changed as you have, with different names to represent your evolving personal interests and areas of focus.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think it's time for a change, and yeah, I just want something that more represents my life as a whole, and that's what I'm sharing with you guys. And so I think, yeah, keep your eyes peeled. I haven't quite nailed down like the right thing yet, but it will be coming.
So, how would you describe your life as a whole?
I mean, it's such a hard question to answer, and I'm really working through this space of like non-labeling and trying to like not put expectations on things. And I think by applying labels, we apply expectations in life on a lot of things. And I've been through quite a lot even since I've moved here. But I think my main goal in life is to move through it mindfully, and to be as present as possible. And I've learned just recently going through a yin training, and getting my certification to teach yin, and really spending a lot of time preparing guided meditations and things, has also helped me move through my path, because to prepare these meditations and walk people through it, I have to go through it myself, essentially. Um, so yeah, I think right now, like my biggest thing is to just be mindful, number one, and number two, to try and be as present as possible. Stop stressing about past, because there's nothing you can do about the past other than learn from it. Um, and stop stressing about the future, because we don't control it. We do have free will, and I believe in free will, but I also think that like what we have to learn really is to tap into our intuition and just allow things to happen, and things would move so much more fluidly if we would stop fighting them all the time. And something I've said to people too, like people ask me a lot, like, well, how did you end up doing what you did, or how did you end up making that decision? And I was like, the decision was already made for me. Like the door was open. I just had to decide whether or not I was going to walk through it. And my life, honestly, would probably be even harder if I had decided to ignore what was handed to me.
Can you explain what that feeling is? The way you describe it sounds like the idea has just been percolating for years. It's as if you've always known you would end up here.
So I always knew that I didn't want to live in the States permanently. That's something that for some reason, for not always, but since college, I've always had this idea that I wanted to live outside of the country, but I didn't understand how to get there, and I didn't understand why. And there's places in the world that I've been to that I love. Like I've always wanted to live in London. I think it's amazing. I've always wanted to live in Paris. I love it. Um, but it's not an easy thing to do. Getting visas, getting sponsorships, getting access essentially to be able to live somewhere and actually function as a citizen and being able to work and stuff is a really hard thing to do. And I've tried a few times in the past couple of years, and those doors weren't open to me at the time. Like they didn't, for whatever reason, they didn't work out. And what that told me at the time is that it wasn't the right time. It wasn't the right opportunity. And I probably wasn't ready for it yet. And what happened with this situation and what I'm saying about like the decision was made for me is pretty much it was like the opportunity was too perfect to walk away from. And energetically, all of the signs in my life were saying, this is right and this is what you should be doing. And that doesn't mean it's easy, but staying in New York would have been even harder in the long term because I wouldn't have been able to grow the way that I needed to grow as a person by staying where I was and keep trying to fight that path when I was meant to be somewhere else.
Do you feel like you are where you're meant to be at this point in your life?
So it's been really hard here. The past 8 months have not been easy adjusting. And I do think that this was a huge part of my journey, and I am a very different person today than I was 8 months ago. And, I'm a very different person today than I was 2 days ago. So yeah, I think that I was in the right place for the past 8 months. I needed to be here. I needed to go through this. I needed to do jobs that I never thought I would have to do. I also, was able to train with Duncan Peak, a yogi here who's just absolutely next level and just really opened up my mind further as an instructor. So there's been opportunities allotted to me coming here that I wouldn't have been able to experience staying at home. So I 100% think that I'm in the right space, but I'm actually the past month or two, things have been shifting for me. And I do think it's potentially time to make another change. And I don't know what that means yet. And I don't know if that means a change within Australia or a change as in coming back to the States or something else. Who knows? There's a lot of things up in the air right now as far as like what my next move is. But what I'm finding and what I think is as much as people look at my life and they think it's really, it's not the norm. Like everybody's like, oh, like that's amazing, but I couldn't do it. I think everybody can do it. And I think everybody should do it, to be honest. I think a lot of us spend a lot of time like thinking we have to do what's culturally set down for us. Like we're raised, or we have up to a certain, until very recently, we were raised to like go to college, get a corporate job, make money, buy a house, have a family. That's success, right? Like that's kind of like the path drawn down for us, especially in the US. Different countries have different, like a little bit of different views on things and stuff, but that's generally like the successful path. It's very traditional, and I think it's still pushed pretty hard as kids, like in the US, go to school, get good grades, go to college. And it's great to see that there's an overall universal shift, I think, like a world shift essentially, that there's a lot more like entrepreneurs, and there's a lot of kids now in school who are starting to run their own businesses at like 16. And I look at that and I'm like, well, what was I doing at 16? And Instagram and social media, it can be super detrimental, I think, but it also has been extremely beneficial to kids kind of, I don't know, experiencing things at younger ages and like, maybe being willing to like put themselves out there and experiment and kind of explore other options than just going to like an Ivy League college. But anyway, I've gone completely off a tangent, I think.
Actually, this is very insightful. Let's say someone listening right now wants to make a move like that, and it's to my understanding that you went to Australia without even having a job lined up. So, what was your plan of action for moving, and what advice can you give to listeners who maybe want to do the same?
So I don't have like the secret how to. It's not a big secret to be honest. The biggest thing I can tell yourself is one, trust yourself, and two, trust the universe. If you're on the path that you're supposed to be on, it will work out. And I had a really hard time. So when I left, I was working corporately at Tommy Hilfiger in New York. I was with them for 5 years, so I put my time in. The company was it's a really good company to work for. Like they treat their employees well. The benefits are good. It's not like I left because I was treated poorly or something like that. It just wasn't right for me. And thankfully, and like I said, I looked at other opportunities prior to this, but I think one of the reasons that this worked for me is because when I left Tommy, I was able to leave with knowing that I had a certain amount of money coming to me. And so I had made it so that like when I left, I was going to get paid out for vacation time. I was going to get paid out in certain like benefit areas. And like, so I knew that I was leaving with enough money to like have a couple months of like a safety net. And I think that's important. Now you don't have to save a ton. I did what I did. I can tell you I did with $10,000. That's all I had to my name. Like $10,000, left New York, moved home for a couple weeks, flew to Europe, traveled Europe for 2 months, flew to Australia, couldn't find work for 2 months, and was able to make that all work on $10,000 and just trust that like the right opportunities would present themselves. Now, you also have to look that like I set myself up the past 10 years to have certain skill sets to fall back on as well. So like not only do I have my BFA, but I had my certification for teaching yoga. I also have a background now on social media. So I was able to pick up some private clients for content creation that way. So I was able to kind of fall back on multiple skill sets so that like if I couldn't find a job in one field, I could fall back on another skill set and find work that way, which I think is really what's been super like helpful for me. And I think for anybody, like learn, take time, go to a class, get educated, whatever you're passionate about, make it a skill so that like if you ever have to fall back, you've got something to fall back on, like when I started here, the first work that I had was teaching yoga classes. And that was like, I could breathe a little bit. Like I had some kind of money coming in once I started teaching. And then I picked up managing one of my studio's social media accounts. And so it was like a little bit more, breathe a little bit more, a little more income coming in, And then now I work for an acai company and I got that pretty much through my Instagram account. And so like I had all of these other things that I could fall back on. And so I'm still not working in fashion. I honestly don't think I ever want to work in fashion again, or at least not anytime soon. But I've been able to like utilize my other skill sets and my other passions to like get me through this.
That's such great advice. Turn passions into certifiable and legitimate skills. I love that. So, while fashion may not be for you, as you just described, you do have a plethora of skills. So, if you had to name something, what do you consider to be your passion?
I think the one thing, I'm just really passionate about spreading good energy, essentially. And I think that falls back to yoga in some sense. And yoga, though I don't define yoga as just my practice on my mat, yoga to me is a lifestyle. And I think that encompasses my passion for healthy eating, as well as my passion for my practice, as well as just my passion to kind of like put myself out there and spread energy and information and knowledge and speak through my Instagram account and kind of create as well. So I think you could say yoga, but I think that for me, yoga encompasses a lot more than just what people define as like going to the studio and practicing on your mat.
I love that you said yoga is a lifestyle. And once you realize that you can carry those practices off the mat and into everyday moments, like that's where the magic is. So, what are a few principles that you've learned through yoga and that you feel others should know about?
Yeah, so I always tell my students when they walk into the room that they're not there to move. They're there to be present. And the first thing I ask my students to do when I teach a class is to check in with themselves and give themselves permission to be here right now in this space, because you can be physically somewhere and not mentally be there at all. And I think that that is the key to yoga, and that doesn't make you a yogi. That just makes you a mindful person. And so it's that constant act of checking in with yourself and asking yourself, where are you right now? Are you in the moment? Are you enjoying this moment, this second right now? Or are you letting it pass you by because you're too worried about what happened yesterday or what's going to happen tomorrow? And I think to me, that's the biggest thing. If you can take 5 minutes out of your day every day and just be like, am I here? Am I here right now in this space and appreciating it for what it is? Or am I off somewhere else? You know, like it's that constant just like stop and check in. When you get stressed out, stop and check in. Why are you stressed out? Why are you creating that anxiety and that energy for yourself? Because it's all internal. Like it's all internal. We have control over the emotions that we're feeling. And I just read the book, The Untethered Soul, which has been out for ages and a bunch of people have read it, I know. But the biggest concept for me was like, you're not the person, you're not the emotion that you're experiencing. And you're not the stress that you're experiencing. You're not the anxiety that you're experiencing. You're not the event that you're experiencing. You're the being that is watching the experience. And so you have to be able to be that being and separate yourself from that space and just let it pass through. Like let it happen and then move on to the next space.
That's beautiful. It makes so much sense. I remember when I was in college and I was studying psychology, there was this concept of selves, and the selves are basically the different aspects and faces of ourselves that we put forward depending on where we are or who we are with, or depends on who we are with. Those sort of things determine what we put forward. And it always felt confusing to me from an identity standpoint. But I love how you just said it's like it comes down to being present and watching the experiences, watching the emotions and everything play out. In that way, you essentially disidentify from the fragment selves and are just the master self. It sounds very mindful and very freeing.
Yeah. And it's actually a very old yogic teaching as well. And there's a name for it. And honestly, I can't remember it off the top of my head. I'm really, really bad with Sanskrit. Like not my like strong point, learning other languages. But it's a very similar concept. And it talks about like the watcher, essentially. Like you are the being that's watching what's going on. You are not like the actual event that's happening. And when you get deep into like yoga and meditation and mindfulness and that kind of stuff, because essentially the asana, the practice that we've westernized and brought into these studios in the States, that's only one limb of the 8 limbs of yoga. And so like a lot of times people talk about being yogis or doing yoga, and you're only like, you're only developing this one tiny little part of what this lineage is. And so people who really delve deep into like the spiritual aspects, and I'm not talking about religious aspects because I don't associate with that. I don't really believe in organized religions, and I definitely don't. I'm not Buddhist. I'm not Christian. I'm not Muslim. I'm not, I don't associate with that. I don't like to label that. Um, it's not about that. It's more just like about your own spirituality and knowing yourself better. And then however you want to connect that back to a higher being is totally up to you. But yeah, so the yogic practice though talks a lot about being the watcher and able to separate your true self from everything else that's happening in the environment around you.
I want I have so many things I want to ask you. You're a wealth of knowledge. Um, I could keep you here forever, but I won't. I do have a couple of closing questions I'd like to ask you if you do still have a little bit more time.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So you've talked a lot about some practices that you have, but do you have any routines or like a healthy habit that you do on a daily or weekly basis, something that makes you feel like your best self?
So I suffered from like very severe digestive issues for the bulk of my life. And one thing I do, and it's literally the simplest thing ever, is I start every morning with warm lemon ACV water. And honestly, it just makes me such a better person throughout the day because my stomach doesn't bother me. I'm able to digest food easier. I don't know, it just makes my system physically function on a much better level. And therefore, it makes me mentally function on a much better level if I'm not dealing with like bloat or constipation or tummy irritation, etc. So for me, like it's a big thing no matter what I'm doing that day. And there's mornings where I get up at 4:45 a.m. to go teach class. I still make hot lemon ACV water before I leave the house.
Yum. I haven't made that in ages, but it is so simple and so healing.
It's so simple and like it doesn't work for everybody. Like that may not be somebody's thing. But what I say is find the thing that works and just do it because it's so worth it. If it makes you like that much of a better human that day, then why not?
What is one thing that people would not expect that you'd be into?
Well, I think a lot of people who follow me on Instagram at least have no idea about my background in fashion. Um, so it's kind of a little inside joke actually. But as far as what I'm into that people would be surprised, I'm trying to think. Well, I'm a total nerd, so I'm totally like, and I don't know if I've ever put this out there or not, but like huge Harry Potter geek and huge Lord of the Rings like fan, fantasy fiction all the way. Like my favorite thing to do is to sit down on a cold, rainy day with a cup of coffee and read like some ridiculous fantasy fiction novel. I just read one by Neil Gaiman, which was so good. I have to tell you guys the name of it. The Ocean at the End of the Lane. Absolutely amazing book. I read 250 pages in literally like 4 hours. I couldn't put it down. So good.
Who is someone that inspires you and why?
I mean, there's so many inspiring people out there these days, like so many. And I tend to be inspired much more, honestly, by like unknown people, like, friends and family and people that I'm close with. Another thing too, like a little bit of a side note, but like, so my father passed away when I was 8 years old. But I've always like aspired to be him because anybody that you talk to who ever met him, like just all they can say is that he was such a light in the world. And I'm like, if I can leave this world and leave that behind, that's all I've ever wanted to do.
Your father sounds amazing. Truly the ultimate inspiration.
I mean, there's so many people that inspire me on a daily basis. And my family in general have been such a huge inspiration to me. Unfortunately, my father's a huge inspiration. My father's memory is a huge inspiration. But also his family, my father's family have just been so supportive and so overwhelmingly loving towards me after having experienced that at a young age that I feel that I have, my dad was the youngest of 10 kids. So I feel like I have essentially 9 fathers and 9 other mothers behind me on top of my own mother, who's just been amazing and supportive through this whole process. And then, all of my like cousins as well. So like we're a super tight knit family, and I just have that whole support system. And I know that like no matter what happens, they're there.
Then, can I ask how you decide to up and leave your hometown when it sounds like you have such a close-knit family? Were you met with resistance, or were they supportive of your choice when you decided to move?
So when I first decided I was going, I was really scared to tell anybody because I didn't know how they would handle it. And so my uncle, one of my uncles who I'm very close with, I'm close with pretty much all of my uncles, but one of them in particular that I'm very close with, I called him up and kind of, just kind of like had a freak out, like had a panic attack, cried a little bit, went through the whole process. And he was like, what is wrong with you? He was like, if you don't get that visa and book that ticket yourself, he's like, I'm physically going to kick you out of the country. Like, you have to do this. He was like, you cannot turn down that kind of opportunity. And he's like, you'll never regret going. You'll only regret not going. And that's what made it so simple for me. Like having his reaction and knowing that I had that support behind me and just like his logic behind it, someone who's never had this opportunity in his life, for him to be able to look at it and say that, I knew right then and there that that was the right decision. And everybody has been super supportive since then. And like, I talk to my mom all the time, and I talk to my family as much as possible. It's hard because not all of them have WhatsApp or Skype and stuff, but we all stay connected. And it is hard. And there's been a few times, Christmas was an absolute nightmare here. Like I was talking to my aunt and my cousins, and like every time someone new got on the phone, I just started crying again. It's terrible. But yeah, like I just know that they're only a flight away, and my best friend's actually getting married in October. So I know that I'll be back in the States, if not before then, definitely in October. So I'll be seeing everybody soon. So I'm just trying to like keep everything under wraps and know that like, yeah, they're not right here in front of me, but they're still always here.
Your uncle sounds super supportive. It sounds like all of your family has been super supportive.
Yeah, and I realize like not everybody's gonna have that experience or feel that support, and I understand that that can create a lot of fear around making large decisions. And all I can say to those people is that like people don't like change, right? People don't like change. They don't like change in their own lives, and they don't like change in your life, because changing your life might disrupt their views of reality. And you just have to understand that like they're not coming at you from a space of like anger or hatred necessarily, but what they're really coming at you with is from a space of fear. And eventually, if they're meant to be in your life and they love you, they'll come around to it. And just because they're fearful right now and maybe not the most supportive doesn't mean that when you pick up that phone a couple weeks from now that they're not going to be there for you. Like you can't let those immediate reactions alter your life course. You just have to learn to kind of come at them with compassion and realize that like most of those negative spaces that people come from is more out of fear, and kind of like they're protecting themselves essentially, and they're protecting the reality that they've built. And a lot of times, once it happens and once the shift happens, they get over it. They get over it just like we get over it, and they're still going to be there for you if they're meant to be in your life.
If you were stranded on a deserted island, what would be one food that you would want to take with you?
Well, it probably wouldn't be anything healthy, that's for sure. Chocolate, anything. I'm a happy camper. Most of my meals, I've put cacao in it somehow. Definitely is top of that list. Like the other thing, if I was thinking savory, I'd have to say I'm kind of a pizza fanatic. Like vegan pizza is life.
Chocolate and vegan pizza. Okay, I'm down. What is a book, a podcast, a movie, or any sort of resource that you would recommend to listeners that has inspired you?
So I highly, highly, highly recommend The Untethered Soul. I've had the book sitting on my reading list for like the past 2 years finally read it a couple months ago, and it was just life-changing. And I think that I had to read it at the right time to understand it, and that's why it sat for as long as it did, because it wasn't the right time for me to read it. So it may not be the right time for everybody to read that book, but put it on your list, and at some point in future, like, you'll find a time where you're going to want to open up that book, and it's just going to be really eye-opening. I found it just very easy to process. It made total sense to me, and it's just really helped me through a lot of spaces in just the past 8 months even. So yeah, The Untethered Soul, super good book. I already recommended the Neil Gaiman book, which is a fantasy book, but it's very thought-provoking. So I do highly recommend that. And give me 1 second, because I'm going to grab this other book that you guys should know about. So I just picked up this book called Wayfinding by M.R. O'Connor, and it is the science and mystery of how humans navigate the world. And it's super scientific. It's definitely a nonfiction book, but it's not one of those, you know, we all talk about these like spiritual self-help books essentially, and they're super trendy right now. And I think Untethered Soul falls into those parameters. I think it's a particularly good one. But this book doesn't fall into that at all. But it's really fascinating because it talks about the human mind and how it develops, and how our memories are connected to how we navigate through space, and how through this huge expansion of GPS and smartphones and stuff, how detrimental that is to like human mind development, and like how it affects even like our overall intelligence levels, and how it affects how we interact with the world around us. And it's just absolutely fascinating. I'm only about a third away through the book, and I don't read stuff like this. Like, I am normally like 2 pages in, I'm falling asleep, but it's absolutely fascinating. So if you have any interest in that, I highly recommend it.
That sounds fascinating. I'm adding it to my list as we speak. So, Leah, what's next in the plans for you?
So I do look in the long term to potentially I'm looking into some products. I can't give too much information in regards to that or anything, but potentially looking into wholesaling certain things. I also obviously want to teach more, and I really am looking into the possibility of running wellness retreats, hopefully around the world, connecting with other like-minded people and other people that have other skills to offer other than mine to run said retreats. I'm going to get involved with that. So I would really love to kind of come full circle with that, as far as not just running a yoga retreat, but like, you know, the full experience, meditation, yoga, mindfulness coaching, like plant-based diet, like healthy food, healthy eating, like the whole experience, so that when you come on these retreats, it's kind of like a jump start to a lifestyle shift, not just a vacation. And to give people the skills to do it, instead of just kind of like running them through things and then kind of leaving them to just jump off a cliff when they're done the retreat in a week, you know, like I want people to actually leave feeling like they can go home, and it's easy to kind of implement some of the stuff that they're learning.
I love that you are looking at ways to address wellness in a very well rounded, sustainable, and holistic way. It sounds so amazing. And those retreats, I would definitely love to be a part of them. They sound incredible.
Yeah, I'm really excited. And it's baby steps for sure. And but it's something that I've been working towards, and I just want to feel like I'm in the right place and have enough education and information behind me to do it the way it should be done. Yeah. So, but it's something that I'm definitely working towards, and that'll also be a part of, I think, you know, the Instagram shift and other things as well.
So exciting. Okay, we've mentioned your Instagram a couple of times, but what's your handle so people can go follow you? And what are any other places that you exist online so people can follow you there as well?
So I am actually like I don't know. I don't have currently you can go to fitgirltreats.com. It does exist, but I'm really not on there. I have a friend of mine. We're going to be reworking the website hopefully soon, so it'll be more functional and more useful for people. Right now, it's just kind of like a landing page. So the best place to find me is Fit Girl Treats on Instagram. I answer all of my comments. So if you guys, leave actual questions or you need information, definitely comment on my posts or DM me personally because I answer everything as soon as I can. I promise, even if a week goes by, I'm still going to get back to you. I don't ignore messages. I just am a little bit slow sometimes, and I do have a time difference, and a lot of my followers are still based in the States. So just be patient with me. And then you can also find me Fit Girl Treats on Facebook. But again, that's pretty much, I'm not super active on there right now. Hopefully in the near future, I will utilize that space more. Potentially some groups and some other things will be going on. So yeah, most likely your best bet to reach me right now is still Instagram.
We have reached the end. Do you have any advice or words of wisdom that you'd like listeners to take away from this episode?
I mean, all I can really say, and I think I've said it already, is like the best piece of advice that I can give you is like stop. Like right now while you're listening to us like do our podcast, listening to us chat, just stop right now and ask yourself, where are you? Are you here? Are you sitting in this moment? Are you taking all of this? And if you're listening to this podcast even, like, are you giving yourself permission to sit here and just listen to this podcast and not worry about anything else? Or are you sitting with the past or worrying about the present? Like that's the best thing I can give you is check in and answer that question honestly. And maybe you're not right here right now. Maybe you are sitting with the past or the future. And if you are, ask yourself why.
That is so powerful. Thank you so much, Leah.
Oh, thank you for having me on. And like I said, I really appreciate you being patient with me. So I'm really glad we actually did this.
All right, guys, that's the end of the episode. I really look forward to hearing what you guys think. Please go leave me a comment on Instagram or on Facebook, and even share this episode with a friend or family member or anyone that you think might be able to benefit from the information and conversation with Leah. I'd also really like to hear what your favorite part of the episode was. I'll go ahead and tell you mine. I thought it was really interesting to hear how she grew up in a small town with a really close-knit family. Sometimes environments like that can make someone, just sort of stay in what they're familiar with and continue living a very comfortable life that way. Nothing's wrong with that, but it was just pretty cool to hear how she felt this desire for something more and ended up going to New York to pursue that. That's so adventurous of her and very expanding to hear about. Just as Leah said in the episode, I think listening to your intuition is really important. Whenever you do listen to your intuition, it won't lead you astray. Another thing I want to add is that I read her book recommendation. After we recorded, I checked out The Untethered Soul, and I've got to say it was a pretty intense read. It feels like a book I can come back to in a few years, and I'll probably have a whole new set of takeaways from it because it was a lot, but still very existentially enlightening. In this episode, she also reminded me about one of my favorite drinks, which is apple cider vinegar and lemon water. I started doing that again in the mornings, and it's such a game changer. It's one of my favorite wellness practices, but just as she said in the episode, what works for her and what works for me, it might not work for you. So what I'm trying to say here is I hope listening to this episode has encouraged you to think about what you're doing, how you're living, and what's serving you. Are the things in your life right now serving you? And if not, hopefully you have the bravery to make some changes or let something go. Actually, let's have that be the goal for this episode and for future episodes to come too. I hope you can find them expansive If you like what you've heard, be sure to subscribe so you won't miss any new episodes. And I'd be thrilled and over the moon if you could leave a rating over on iTunes. It's really going to help this podcast grow, and that's what we all want here, right? If you're listening, hopefully you agree. All right, then. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Bye.